Welcome, parents and guardians, to our first learning session, our series for 2026. I would like to introduce our bryt coordinators, myself, Lakeisha. Then we have Julie. Then we have Victor. And then we do have a fourth individual or person, but unfortunately, she could not be here with us tonight. So bryt is a program that helps transforms how schools support students and families who've experienced mental health disruption and are being reintegrated back into school. As coordinators, we want to connect with you, parents, guardians, and talk through some of the issues and topics that are most relevant to us parents. We do this by offering a learning series topic issue on the first Tuesday of every month. Topics are chosen or identified by parents as being the things that they want to learn more about. We have 2 learning sessions via Zoom. So the first conversation takes place every second Tuesday of the month for all parents. And the second conversation takes place every fourth Tuesday of the month, and it's dedicated to our BIPOC affinity parents. So please come join us. We can support each other with whatever is going on that day, anything that happened in the past, or you foresee in the future. We can brainstorm and help untangle any sticky situations that you're facing. We, the coordinators, are also parents, so we are here for you. So with that said, tonight we have a special guest who will discuss the following topic, which is the most essential thing parents need to know about trauma. And I will pass this on to my counterpart, Julie, who will introduce the speaker of the night. Julie, it's all yours.
Thank you, Lakeisha. Hello, everyone. Tonight I'm going to introduce Nicole Wolford, who is an assistant professor of social work at Westfield State University in Massachusetts, where she teaches advanced adult and family clinical social work courses, as well as courses on diversity and social justice, social welfare, policy analysis, and school social work. As a licensed clinician in California and Massachusetts, Nicole has provided consultation to school districts about student mental health, suicide risk assessment and prevention, and she has provided mental health consultation to community-based organizations on issues of race, equity, and inclusion. Nicole has worked in outpatient adult and adolescent community mental health settings and managed a children's outpatient mental health treatment facility, oversaw district-wide mental health services delivery for K through 12 students, and currently provides clinical consultation, supervision, and training on mental health. Nicole, we are so glad and grateful that you are here with us tonight. I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Hey, well, thank you all so much. It is a pleasure to be here. And can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Wonderful.
we can.
Okay. So what I am planning to do this evening is to talk about exactly what Julie just mentioned, which is what parents need to know about trauma. It is so important. It is vitally important, particularly in this day and age. We are in the era of social media, and whether we like it or not, children have access to a lot more information these days than they used to. They will scroll on cell phones. They have access to, news on television, whatever the adults are talking about, high anxiety. And that's in addition to whatever is going on in the child's day-to-day life. So parents now more than ever need to have an understanding of what is age-appropriate exposure for children, which is getting more and more difficult, increasingly difficult to discern. But also depending upon your particular child's development, what your child has already experienced, meaning does your child already have or come with certain vulnerabilities and sensitivities, and then what your role is in trying to help navigate all of the things that are going on in our very complex world today that can not only cause anxiety in children, but can also be sources of trauma for children. So I am going to share my screen and give me just a moment to pull this up. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay, wonderful. So here we go. What parents need to know about trauma. And before I get started, just to say, this is a very brief PowerPoint presentation and slideshow. It certainly does not do the entire context of trauma justice. It's some information for parents to be able to learn a little bit and also to be thinking about what your role is as a parent in relation to your child. So that is why I started this presentation with this very first slide. This very first slide is a parent who is doing the best that he can, trying to be emotionally connected, listen, and be attuned to his child. This is one of the most important things that parents can do, is their physical and emotional presence when a child has experienced trauma. Okay. Okay, so you've heard me say when a child has experienced trauma. Well, what is trauma? Let's talk about that. So, trauma, we have to remember, is not just about a particular event that a child experiences. It is not just the event. What we have to know is that we can have 5 different people experience the exact same traumatic event, but not be traumatized by that event. Some will, and some may not. So, what is important for parents to recognize is that it's not just that your child has experienced something or gone through something, but it's also how your child has experienced and potentially internalized the event. Now, when I say internalize the event, what I mean by that, there's this age and developmental language, which is knowing your own child and knowing, depending upon the developmental age and stage of your child, how much your child will believe or think that whatever this bad thing is that happened, was it their fault? Did they cause it? If they believe that this event was their fault, so for example, many children believe my parents are getting a divorce because I wasn't good enough, because I was a bad kid, or I created too many problems for my parents. Okay, so that's what I mean, that parents can get divorced for a million different reasons, but it's important for parents to know that a child, and oftentimes the younger the child, the more that they will refer to themselves and potentially believe that they had a cause for whatever the bad thing, traumatic thing that happened. So it's important to recognize, how does your child process this event? Now, many parents have multiple children. So this is where it gets really tricky and challenging, because one child may process the event one way, another child may process the event in a different way, and a third and fourth and fifth child could process the event in a completely different way. This is what makes parenting so challenging, because being able to understand how each of your children is making sense of what happened is a tremendous responsibility. It's a lot of work, and it takes a lot of practice, and it also takes a relationship building between the parent and the child, so that the child will feel comfortable and safe enough to share whatever feelings or experiences they have going on in the inside. A lot of children, because what they're called, it's called self-referential, they believe this bad thing happened because of me. And they oftentimes will have questions like, what happened to me? And also, why did this happen to me? The self-referential part is, did this happen to me because I was bad or I did something wrong? So that's what I was referring to earlier. It's important to let your child know that they did not do anything wrong and they did not cause this event. And so it's important to also remember, trauma is not just an event that can occur when a child is feeling overwhelmed. And overwhelmed means that they are experiencing emotions on the inside that are beyond their capacity to fully understand what is happening to them, what is happening around them, and what is happening to the important people who are also involved in this situation. So trauma occurs when all of that overwhelms the child and they can no longer function optimally in the face of having experienced this trauma. And so let's talk a little bit about what are some examples of causes of trauma. Keep in mind, these are limited examples. These are not everything that can happen in a child's life. So these are just some examples and some of the most obvious ones. So if you look at the top left, you see a child that is lying there in a hospital bed. There are many children who go through what's called medical trauma. Is they have surgeries at very young ages. They have procedures that are done to them that they don't have any control over. They may not understand. They might be in situations like this where they are lying in bed. They may not have the capacity to move. They may or may not be seeing their parents all the time, depending upon the severity of their illness. These kinds of experiences can be very traumatic, particularly for young children, because of the limitations on their understanding of what's happening to them. Okay? The right picture is more obvious. Certainly, children can be experiencing physical abuse. They may or may not have marks or bruises like this particular child does. It does not matter if the child has marks or bruises. Physical abuse is physical abuse. And so a child can certainly be traumatized by being the victim of physical abuse, both in their families and outside of their families. Children are oftentimes harmed physically in social settings, at school, all sorts of situations. So just remembering, again, it's what happens to the child, okay, and it's also how the child experiences what has happened to them. Some other obvious examples are you see to the bottom left, you see a very severe car accident. Chances are people were probably injured. That is another way that people can and children can experience trauma. The middle slide has a variety of natural disasters. We're talking about fires, we're talking about hurricanes, we're talking about tornadoes, we're talking about floods. If you are paying attention to the news, a lot of these things are happening in our world today. They're overwhelming to adults, and so they are certainly overwhelming to children. So being able to limit exposure to these kinds of things, these are the things that are overwhelming to just about anyone. And part of it is because we don't have any control whatsoever over what happens when these things get started. So just being mindful that if adults are feeling stressed and traumatized by these natural events, children certainly are as well. And they need an emotionally regulated parent to help support them as they are trying to understand for themselves how they are going to cope and survive with whatever's coming up for them emotionally as a result. The bottom right image is an image of domestic abuse, domestic violence. This is something, unfortunately, that many children also experience. It could be a one-time event. It could be multiple events. But when children are growing up in a home where there is violence and violence exposure, it doesn't necessarily have to be punching, like you see this person that has a fist. It could also be verbal abuse. It could be sexual abuse. It can be emotional abuse. Any sort of abuse like that that is occurring in a home or with family members, relatives, anyone is also exposing that child to trauma. Okay, the next one is these are some additional things to be thinking about. Oftentimes when we think about trauma, we think about like person-to-person violence and things like that. But we also have to remember that depending upon a child's family, a child's identity, a child's status in terms of immigration status in a country, the language that they speak, how they dress, their gender, their sexual orientation, their religion, there are many, many categories in which children are discriminated against, are bullied, can be victimized, in their community solely because of who they are, what language they speak, what gender they identify with, their class background, their size. There are many, many, many studies that show that students that have larger body sizes are more likely to be teased, more likely to be bullied than children who do not. And so also thinking about the impacts of racism and all of the other ways that children can be discriminated against. This is huge. Again, they are being impacted at vulnerable developmental stages of their lives that can have an impact. One of the most traumatic things that a child can experience is the death of a parent or of a caregiver. Here you see a mother who is with her child. The assumption is perhaps the child's other parent is deceased. This is, again, another time that parents are really going to be pushed to attend to not only their own emotional needs, but also to their child or their children's needs to help children, depending upon how old the child is. How do you explain death to a 4 or 5-year-old? Very, very challenging. Also, again, I mentioned community violence. Part of community violence and home violence in particular has to do with children being removed at times from their homes, depending upon where people are living. In the West Coast, it's often kind of called CPS, Children's Protective Services. On the East Coast, it's more DCF, the Department of Children and Families. There are children that are being removed from their families every single day. And that is one of the most traumatic experiences that children can have, even if there is abuse or neglect happening in the homes. Okay. And again, I've already mentioned the bullying that children can and do often experience. And so it's important when we're thinking about trauma, it's important to distinguish between these big T traumas versus the little t traumas. Now, these categories are what the research has identified. What I will tell you is there's also subjectivity to this. And what I mean by that is what you might consider a big T, someone else might consider a little t. And what someone might experience a little t, you might experience or your child might experience as a big T. So just keep that in mind when you see this list. Okay? So, but essentially what we're talking about for a big T trauma, we're talking about a single overwhelming event. So a one-time experience of physical abuse or sexual abuse or assault. These are huge things. House fire, death of a loved one, a tragic car accident. These are the things that happen one time, and that's it. And they have a lasting impact. Now, we do know that some of these things that are under big T also occur more often than just one time. So we're also talking about these ongoing stressors that build up over time, not necessarily as severe as physical abuse or sexual assault, but these are the things that are happening little by little by little by little by little by little by little over time. So you have the children who are experiencing emotional abuse, neglect, and that can be emotional neglect, it can be physical neglect, it can be a child growing up in a home where there is chronic criticism, yelling, screaming, name calling, bullying that is going on in the household, as well as housing instability. So it doesn't necessarily mean the person becomes homeless or the family becomes homeless, but it could be the threat of homelessness or the threat of losing one's job, things like that that are providing ongoing stressors that is being brought into the family. And so when children are growing up in homes where they have experienced trauma, both within the home, or they have not experienced trauma within the home, but they are living in a home and they're going to a school, for example, or they're in a neighborhood where they are exposed to violence, for example, when they're going to school, we have to realize that trauma is absolutely going to be impacting the way in which children's brains develop and the ways in which their bodies will be reacting. This is all about safety. This is all about survival. And so when children's bodies and their safety has been threatened, their bodies are going to be activating stress hormones to get their bodies activated to be able to seek safety, to seek protection. What oftentimes happens is that there are a number of stress hormones that are released. One of them is increased cortisol. Cortisol will trigger, it's a stress hormone, but these stress hormones are activated to protect and save the person. Get out of that dangerous situation. So what happens is the brain gets triggered, and the more frequent children are exposed to traumatic experiences, their brains have less of an opportunity to calm down to baseline. The body is sort of stuck in a triggered state. That's what we mean when we say someone is living in survival mode. Okay, their body doesn't have an opportunity to fully and thoroughly relax and recover from the traumatic exposure. So some of you may have heard of some of the more common ways that the body tends to react to traumatic exposure. First one is fight. How do you fight yourself out of this situation so that you can save yourself? The next one is flight. How quickly can you run away from this situation so that you can save yourself? The third one and another one is freeze, which is for some people, the safest option for their bodies is to not move at all. This is one of the things we talk about. We talk about being a deer in headlights. That is the trauma response that deer oftentimes will employ for their own safety and protection, and whether it works or not. Sometimes you need to be running, not freezing. And sometimes you need to be freezing and not running. So when the brain kicks in, though, we just do what our bodies tell us to do for our own safety and survival. It's also important to realize that because the child's body and all of their senses have been impacted by this traumatic exposure, when children have been traumatized, it is to be expected that their schoolwork will be negatively affected. Not for all children, but for most children, having to manage all that is going on for them on the inside while trying to manage all of the demands at home and the demands at school. Typically, schoolwork will and certainly can be negatively affected. It doesn't mean that it's going to last forever. It's important that children get the support that they need to continue to stay on top of their schoolwork, but also be treated with empathy and compassion, that they've been through a rough time. So yes, it makes a lot of sense that even temporarily, schoolwork might suffer for a while. Some children who have experienced trauma also, it impacts their mood. So you might see emotional outbursts at school or at home. You may see mood changes. Those could include anxiety. Those could include depression. Those could include just moodiness. One mood, one moment, another mood, another moment. All of that can be considered normal after exposure to a trauma. It's also important to monitor and watch the child's eating. You can have children, some who stop eating or at least reduce their eating intake, and they start to experience weight loss. You also have some children who start to try to cope with their feelings on the inside through eating, through comfort foods, and you might begin to see a child experience weight gain. Either one of those could be important to notice, and almost in many cases, particularly with how much weight loss or weight gain, it might be important to bring the child to their pediatrician to get some additional medicals. In younger children, they can be exhibiting clinginess. They don't want to go to bed by themselves. They don't want to be alone. Some kids may begin bedwetting. Some kids may resume bedwetting. There could be crying episodes. They could be tantrums. Some kids will regress to baby talk. These are all things to be expected in younger children. Does not mean that these behaviors will last forever, but just be mindful that your child is trying to self-regulate and is right now is dysregulated. They can have difficulty concentrating at home, concentrating in school. Their homework can suffer, their grades can drop. These are things to all be aware of. If they're short term, that's one thing. If you start to notice that they're happening more long term, you may really consider getting your child some additional outside help. The somatic symptoms are the symptoms that happen within the child's body. These can include headaches, it could be stomach aches. This is a child that just may seem like they don't have a whole lot of energy. They might be sleeping more. Their bodies, they feel tired. These are things to also pay close attention to, and to just be mindful that your child might be struggling a little more than you are able to handle. So be mindful of maybe seeking some additional help. Okay. And if these are happening with your child, it's important for you to remember that, your child's trauma is not a parenting failure. Life happens. People make mistakes, violence happens, bad things happen to children. It's important to remember that the behaviors that children and adolescents exhibit after their exposure to trauma are adaptive survival responses. Okay? It does not mean that they are bad. It does not mean that they're trying to be defiant. Their bodies are trying to re-regulate after they have been dysregulated. So it's important to remember that, and also pay attention to when the symptoms begin. Symptoms of a child typically begin immediately after a trauma, not always. They can persist for at least 3 days or up to a month. And if it's needed to meet the disorder criteria, what you're going to see is more longer term symptoms that are not going away. And again, I will reiterate, these symptoms, whatever they may be, are your child's attempts to cope with whatever is going on for them on the inside. It does not mean that they are being bad. It means that their bodies are trying to regulate, and that ultimately they're trying to remain safe. So what can parents do? Okay. Well, parents can do a lot. Parents have a lot of power in relation to their kids. And one of the first things that parents can do is to work to try to create greater sense of safety. Safety is everything for a child. And so a parent's ability to create a sense of safety, some of that might be establishing a routine so that the child gets to learn in the mornings, this is what we do. In the middle of the day, this is what happens to me. When I get home from school, this is what happens. This is our routine around dinner time. This is our routine around bedtime. And so it recreates a sense of safety and predictability for the child. Another thing is listening to your child. Do they need to talk to you? Do they want to talk about what has happened to them? Do they not want to talk about what has happened to them? What do they need from you, or what do they need from other people to help them feel safe again? One of the things that can help support that sense of safety is maintaining a structure, a predictable routine, particularly reducing exposure to violence. With today's video games and movies and television, violence is absolutely everywhere. So as much as possible, reducing your child's exposure to violence can go a long way in helping their nervous system to calm and to reset. Also, predictability in terms of the child's basic needs: food, clothing, shelter, sleep, safety, safe touch. All of those things go a long way in helping to ensure that your child feels safe, feels connected to you, feels protected, and again, helps regulate their nervous system towards safety. Okay, so what can you do as a parent? You can do a lot. You can offer your support through your emotional presence. If you remember that opening slide, sometimes it isn't even about talking. Sometimes it is just being there, being present, being around your child in case they want to talk with you. Maybe they just want a hug, but building a connection with your child goes a long way in helping them to regulate. And again, your job as a parent is about supporting your child's emotional regulation. Now, one of the first things, one of the most important things to help support a child's emotional regulation is to make sure that you, as a parent, have emotional regulation. Okay? You will be modeling for your child what emotional regulation looks like and also what it feels like. You can talk to your children about their feelings. You can help children name their feelings. Sometimes children are feeling all kinds of things on the inside and they're not quite sure what they're called. What do those feelings even mean? You can listen to your children if they want to talk about what happened to them. And you can also let them know it's okay if they don't want to talk about what happened to them. But just reassure them that you will be there if they ever do want to talk about what happened. You can also offer to them an opportunity to talk to someone else other than you if they're willing to do that. You can answer their questions and being mindful of their chronological age as well as their developmental age. You know, you want to be age mindful when you're answering their questions. You don't want to answer a 5-year-old's question in the same way that you would answer a 16-year-old's question. Okay, so just being mindful to answer their questions in age appropriate ways. Because your child has been exposed to a trauma, sometimes just that can also be triggering for parents. It can trigger parents' trauma histories. So it's going to be very important for you, and this is a real opportunity to model coping skills. How do we cope with trauma in this household, in our family? There are some things such as deep breathing. There's some people who take up prayer, taking naps, walking, doing some light exercise, really being able to make sure that you get enough sleep, drinking enough water, all of the things to help your body feel supported and nourished as you are working on regulating the internal experience, the emotional experience. It's also something you might consider if your child is struggling in school, to, if it feels safe enough for you to do so, to let your child's teacher know or school know what they are struggling with. You may not necessarily tell them the specifics of what they are struggling with, but just to give them a heads up that they're going through a hard time right now so that the behaviors that might be changed at school will make sense. It's given the context. Okay. And lastly, it is so important for you as a parent to take care of yourself. This is one of the things that as parents, we oftentimes neglect first. We're so busy trying to take care of ourselves, take care of our children, sometimes working jobs, sometimes taking care of elderly parents, taking care of the house, paying the bills, going grocery shopping, all the things that are requirements to be an adult. And so on top of that, in terms of being able to take care of your children, and everything else that you have to be responsible for, if it's possible, even if it's 5 minutes a day, to do something where you can take care of yourself. It will allow you the spaciousness to be more present and available to yourself so that you can ultimately be more present and available to your children. So here are some final key takeaways. Number one, we have to remember that trauma is about experiences. It is not about weakness. For any of us who lives on this planet long enough, we are more likely than not going to have exposure to trauma. That in and of itself does not make or break our lives and our experiences. It also is not a weakness. Trauma is an exposure to something that has overwhelmed the system that can be treated and healed through interventions and as well as through physical and emotional support. It's important to watch your child's behavior because behavior changes can signal communication that your child is actually doing well or your child is not doing well with whatever they've been exposed to. It's important to remember that healing happens through safe and supportive relationships. And as a parent, you are of utmost importance of being able to foster a safe and supportive relationship with your child or children so that they will feel comfortable coming to you and sharing whatever it is that they have experienced and going through and could feel like they're going to get the support that they need. Parents, you play a powerful role. It's not necessary for you to have all of the answers. You may not have any idea what to do about your child's situation. And that's understandable, and that is perfectly fine. What you can do is just be present for your child. You can do the best you can to try to be connected to your child so that whenever your child feels that they need something from you, you can have the capacity to be there for them, even if it's just sitting there quietly, right? Even if it's just watching them read a book, whatever the thing is, they know that you were there for them and that you were present. And if your child is really struggling, if there's any concerns that you have, for example, that your child might be saying that they are engaging in any self harm behaviors, if they talk about feeling suicidal, they don't want to live anymore, if you see your child giving things away, if you see them talking about harming themselves, if you find weapons, or any sort of instruments where a child can harm themselves, these are very, very concerning. And these are the areas where you want to seriously consider getting your child professional support. If your child over time has symptoms that persist and they are not getting better or they worsen over time, it's understandable because trauma can absolutely interfere with daily functioning. But if there are any safety concerns, you want to make sure that you reach out and seek professional help for your child and perhaps for yourself as well. So just remember, trauma happens, but healing is possible. You play a very, very instrumental role in helping to support your child or your children with not only understanding eventually what has happened to them, but also letting them know that they are loved, they are supported, they are not at fault for what has happened to them, and that little by little by little and over time, that they can heal from the traumas that they've been exposed to. So thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Nicole. That was incredible. In these times of like so much, I feel like trauma being aimed at us, even just in the news media as adults, um, it's so important to just have these conversations and realize that our children can recover and that they're not, that we're not all damaged. We can get through this as adults and children. And just, I love that you have so many ways to think about a child in different levels, and that their reactions might look really, really different depending on what age they are or who they are as a person. It can
Right.
look very different, which I love too, because so often it's that, well, if this happens, then this is the trauma and this is how they react. And that's not the case. So I thank you for all those wonderful examples of that. So that's
Thank
great.
you. Thank you,
I do
Victor.
have a question too. Um, my question is, so your child experienced some kind of trauma. You tell the teacher, and that's great, and you tell the school so they can look out for them. Um, my other thought is, how do you deal with their peers, their friends, and they're exhibiting behaviors certain times, and you're worried when they go to like a sleepover or a friend's house, and you're afraid that the thing that you do at home to sort of help them regulate, how are they going to experience that when they're at their friend's house? And do I tell the parent? Um, and do I have that conversation with my child? Like, call me, or like, what would be the best, do you think, thing to do in that situation?
So thank you for that question because, of course, just like with anything, it depends. Sometimes in certain cases when children are visiting friends or spending the night or whatever they're doing, sometimes the parents know each other, sometimes not so much. They have play dates and things like that. And I'm glad you brought this up about, what to tell, or if you decide to tell what's going on with your particular child. Um, Again, depends on the age and developmental stage of the child. The thing that I would caution about is not to tell anything to anyone about your child without serious consideration. And you may, just to clarify, when I mean tell a teacher or tell a parent, I don't mean tell the details of what happened to your child. I mean generalities, like I just want to let you know, my child's going to be spending the night, birthday party, sleepover. But he's been going through a rough time right now. There's a lot going on in his life right now. So, He may or may not decide to stay. And if there's anything that you notice that is of concern to you, just give me a call. I just wanted to let you know.
That's so helpful. Yeah.
Generalities. You
Yeah.
don't want to spread your business, personal business all
Just
over
throw up all over them, like all their stories. No, that's so smart. That's great. And that way it prepares them so if something does come up, they're not surprised. At the same time, you're not airing all of your stuff.
Right, exactly. And depending upon the age of the child, you can talk with them about, how much or how little they feel comfortable sharing about what's going on. They may not want anybody to know, and then you have to navigate that. So, it can get tricky between what you as a parent believe the child needs to know, what other people need to know. And but I would say err on the side of share less, because once it's out, if there's any specifics that are out, you can never take that back. So be very cautious.
And then I have another question on the flip side of that is, so you're both your child and another child has experienced some kind of trauma, and you've gotten help for your child, and your child is doing quite well, and you see that the other child is not doing well, and the parent is like, oh, they're fine, oh, they're fine. What do you do with that? Like, do you just leave it alone and just kind of let the child fall apart, or do you interact, or you talk to the parent, what do you do?
Right. And so as a parent, I know this because let's say this is a friend of my child, and I see some behaviors that are concerning. Is that what you mean?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So, again, it depends. It depends. The closer to the circle, so you think about we have like an inner circle of friends, and then you might have a, mid-level circle of friends, and then you have the outer level of friends. So you have to be very, very mindful of, what is your relationship to that child and the child's parents. And if there's anything that is concerning to you, and again, there's mild, moderate, and severe, no matter how much you know or don't know a particular parent, if you notice another child is exhibiting danger to self, danger to other behaviors, absolutely tell. That is a child that is very much struggling and needs immediate intervention. If it is a child that and let's say that you have contact with a parent and you have seen something, heard something, and exhibited concerns, one thing to think about first is, if my child were exhibiting this and I didn't know it and another parent did know it, would I want that parent to tell me? Okay. Because it's having to do with children, we have to err on the side of caution, even if that means we ended up making a mistake. Even if that means that the child ends up being upset or angry with us. But remember, we also have to be factoring in, depending upon what it is that we know, is this child exhibiting behaviors as a red flag that I'm not safe at home? If that's the kind of situation going on, then you have another issue on your hands, because you don't want to get involved in a situation where the child may have shared to you that some abuse or neglect is going on in the home, and then the child is reprimanded for that, or worse. So there's a lot of responsibility when we're taking care of other people's children, and we have to recognize that responsibility.
Definitely. Thank you so much. So helpful.
Do you want to piggyback off of that in terms of my question? And I see this all the time, and dealing with parents from the Caribbean island, with all this trauma and stuff. What are some subtle or often missed signs of trauma in children? Because a lot of times people will say, "Oh, the kid's just bad," or he'll grow out of that. When really and truly, there's actually more that's going on. So, what do you think? Are some subtle things that we should know or should be kind of aware of?
Right.
When it comes to when you're dealing with some kind of trauma in a child's life.
Right. So I'm so glad you are asking this question, Lakeisha, because what you have introduced is the completely important cultural background, right? We all come from different places. And you were talking about, whether it's Caribbean families or from families from wherever, it really doesn't matter. Many, many different cultures have very different expectations for themselves as parents, for their children and their children's behaviors. There are certain cultures that don't even have a conceptualization of mental health problems or trauma. It's like not even a thing, it doesn't exist. And so we have to be mindful of that. Again, parents are doing the best that they can, but if they don't have any concept or awareness that trauma is even a thing, there's no way that they're going to be able to recognize it, to be able to go, oh, this is actually my child struggling. Okay, this is not my child exhibiting bad behavior. So part of it is, yes, this is why mental health awareness is vital. And this is also why combating mental health stigma is vital. Because if people think, oh my goodness, people are going to think I'm crazy, or people are going to think my child is crazy, then, well, no one's going to want to seek help for anybody because of the stigma, the fear of the stigma, and the attached label that gets associated with it. The thing is, though, we have come such a long way, fortunately, in helping more and more people understand that the same way that we need to be aware of our own physical health and the physical health of our children, we also need to be aware of our own mental and emotional health and the mental and emotional health of our children. And just where we started at the top of the hour, we are living in some overwhelming times these days. And we as parents are stressed out. So, of course, our children that have less knowledge, less understanding, fewer emotional and internal resources, of course they are going to be stressed out. And so, this is the challenge of parenting in 2026 is how do we absorb and metabolize and make sense of the world we're in today and whittle it down to age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, personality appropriate, the time appropriate way to help children little by little by little start to be able to make sense of the world around them that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Yep. But going back to where you started, talking about culture and having a sensitivity and a respect for different cultural differences, it really is the role of providers, the roles of teachers, the roles of therapists to be able to work very hard to bridge those cultural gaps so that they have respect for the parents and they can cultivate trust with the parents so that the parents can trust them with their child. And that it's all coming from a place of care and concern. We're not saying that this child is bad. They might be saying the child is bad, but we're not saying the child is bad. We're saying this child actually probably needs some support.
I have another question around siblings. So you have one child that's experienced some trauma and the other one hasn't. And so you're putting all your attention on the child that's had the trauma, and the other child now is exhibiting behaviors because they feel left out or they feel like you're paying too much attention. How do you balance that one out?
Ooh, that's a good one, Victor. This happens all the time. That something happens in a family where one child experiences something really hard or traumatizing, and the other children in the family do not. Well, let me tell you, I have seen many, many, many times over the years. I used to do a lot of family therapy, and it does shift. And, it does and can and does shift the ways in which parents interact with the child that is struggling, the child that has experienced the trauma, the child that is really going through a hard time. Not all parents, but there are a lot of parents, when something bad happens to their child, they feel guilty and they feel responsible. I should have known. I should have been there. I should have protected my kid. I should have, all the shoulds, right? I should have. And so, in certain family systems and family dynamics, because of the guilt that the parent internalizes, they go way overboard to try to overcompensate for the guilt that they are feeling. So, what does that present? What does that set up? Well, the kids that didn't experience the trauma are now mad because why is this one getting more attention, special treatment, right? And so, yes, these things absolutely have an impact on the way the family system operates. Again, it's going to look different from family to family, culture to culture. What I just described is certainly is not always the case. Some kids who would depend on what's happened, they actually get demonized. They get ostracized. They get horror treatment, right? So every family situation is going to be different. But will it affect the family? Absolutely. We just can't predict how it's going to affect the family. But in those kinds of situations, typically the entire family needs help to be able to regroup and stabilize, to support the child or children who have experienced the thing, and also to support the child or children who haven't experienced the thing, and get support for the parents for whatever feelings are coming up for them about what has happened to their child. Okay?
Mm,
It's complex, right? Because sometimes the thing that happened to their child might be they did the thing to their child. Not necessarily intentionally,
Right.
but
mhm.
sometimes intentionally.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very complex.
Oh, that's
And to
so important.
piggyback,
Yeah.
to piggyback off of that, sorry, Victor,
That's
what
okay.
you said was
Yeah.
like uh, how do you work with parents who have their own trauma history and how do they respond to their
Mm,
children with trauma?
Yeah, because many parents who have experienced trauma don't necessarily recognize it as trauma. It's just,
Right.
a hard life. You know, uh, for the most part, in schools, people aren't learning the things that we're talking about here today. How do we recognize the difference between, oh, I'm having a hard time? I mean, who isn't having a hard time at some point in their lives? But having a hard time is not necessarily the same as traumatic exposure. When we're talking about trauma, we're talking about experiences that change the person from the inside, okay? Changes the way that their body functions, changes the way that their mind functions, changes the way that they are, their mood, changes the ways in which they are able to sleep or not sleep, how they are able to, their energy. It's there are multiple layers of impact when someone is experienced trauma. Okay, so much of this is the psychoeducation that is needed, so that parents can really be able to understand the difference between my kid's a little sad or my kid lost, their best friend, and my child has been traumatized. There's a vast difference with what, there can be some overlap in how certain things look. Kids can be sad when they've been traumatized. They can be sad because they're moving out of the area. But it's more the longer term impact of what happens with trauma that goes unhealed. You will get over the fact that your family moved away and you left your best friend. It may feel traumatic at the time, but compared to other situations that are having lasting impact, right? Lasting impact on the body, lasting impact on the mind, lasting impact on their emotions, lasting impact on their appetite, on their sleep. That's
mm,
what we're talking about when we're talking about trauma.
mm.
Yeah. Hey, Nicole, I was wondering, which is a little bit of a segue, because I teach in schools. I work with kids that specifically have lots of trauma. And I'm curious if you have any guidance for how you might talk to teachers, because there's this, um, you know how they want people to follow the rules, and if they don't follow the rules, there needs to be a punishment. And I struggle to not share too much because I often know more than I should, but also understanding like, hey, this kid's different. There's some things going on with them. Is there any guidance that you could give me on how I might talk to teachers who may have a hard time understanding that, might have more black and white thinking about there's always a punishment if they don't act the right way?
Yeah, so this is where it gets really tricky. This is a great question, Julie. And I think that what also happens, because when I worked in school districts, I experienced the same thing.
Mhm.
I think we've come as a society, I think we've come a long way in being able to teach and have an understanding of more social and emotional development and social emotional needs of children. But depending upon where people are teaching, classrooms are oftentimes quite full, even overcrowded,
Yeah.
with one teacher in the classroom with 30 children, sometimes 30 students, and no possible way, no possible way for that teacher who is being held accountable for teaching X, Y, and Z, okay, to be paying attention to all of the different emotional traumas and experiences that these children are going through. And that's not to let teachers off the hook. It's just more to look at the reality of the context and the challenges that teachers in many cases are experiencing. Now, does that mean that we can't do anything? No, because there are teachers who, regardless of their levels of overwhelm, they really want to know, what can I do to help this child be able to learn in my classroom? Okay. So yes, part of the talking is going back to what I was saying earlier, which is, and I don't know, in your particular situation, Julie, what I would say is I would not talk to the teacher about certain things with a child, even if it's
Right.
vague or in general, without having a conversation with that parent first and just seeing what their parents' thoughts are about sharing minimal information, but just sort of giving a teacher a heads up. But that also can be such a powerful opportunity to collaborate, because if you're there at the school, the teacher's there at the school, the students at the school, if we can get the parent into the school or even on the phone to be able to collaborate, we want to work together with the parent and the child and the teacher to be able to support this child, knowing this child is struggling right now, to the best of our ability. That's the intention. We don't want the child to fall behind in school. We want to be able to provide support at school or help the parent get support outside of school so that the child doesn't fall too far behind.
Mhm.
Easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, in my case, some of my students, it's their parents that have caused the trauma.
Right.
So yeah,
Right.
that's
That's why
challenging. Yeah.
very, very challenging. Yeah, and that's why a lot goes on in schools trying to support those students.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people at schools know that sometimes students are coming to school and they're not coming from safe home environments.
Right. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you so much, Nicole. This has been so wonderful to have you back again with
Thank
us.
you.
And
Right?
what a treat. I hope you'll come back next year. Maybe you'll have a yearly visit with us. We really enjoy that on another topic.
That
Um,
would be great.
He's so great. Thanks so much to Julie and Lakeisha and for helping tonight and with all the great questions and support. Again, thank you, Nicole. This has been fantastic. So much information. And, we'll get to be able to rewatch this and people will get to watch this and really it'll be very helpful for children that are experiencing trauma or, if that ever happens, people have now a tool belt to help them through it.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk about bryt has these wonderful programs. We have this, of course, tonight, our U2 Live, and then we also have supporting parents groups, which meet always on the second Tuesday of the month and the last Tuesday of the month. The second Tuesday of the month, everyone is welcome. And we usually chat about whatever people's on their mind. It's a great place just to come and meet other parents and also get to chat with us. And we're all parents. And then at the end of the month, there's a BIPOC meeting for families as well. And so we're really happy to have both those groups so people can come in and chat about either this topic or any topic, like I said before. But it's been such a wonderful evening. Thank you so much, Nicole, again. And this has been great. And we hope, I'm going to say it again, I'm going to plug again. We hope to have you back. And we hope that Megan feels better and we get to have her back next month.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thanks
Thank
So much, Nicole.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening. And I'll send you an email, Julie.
Great.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank
you.